Welcome to the layer by layer overview of Psalm 91. A way to remember this psalm is with the phrase, the sheltered one. The psalm begins with requesting shelter from imminent danger, but it ends with promises of long life and salvation. Psalm 91 meditates on the Lord's promised protection and victory for the one faced with attacks from all sides. We'll start with an overview of the structure of the psalm. It has three main sections, each with direct speech. The direct speech is not always clearly indicated, however, which can make this psalm challenging to understand. The first section is, "Danger will not come near." It begins with the person in danger, whom the imagery indicates is a king, declaring that the Lord is his refuge. That confession, which is the public statement of what he believes, is supported with the confidence that, because God's faithfulness surrounds him, he will not be afraid. Danger will not come near. The second section is, "His angels will protect you." Again, it starts with a confession, but this time the focus is on those who are actively protecting. God's angels will surround and protect the king. In the third section, the Lord himself speaks. "I will give him long life." The Lord confirms with a vow everything that has been said. I will be with him in trouble. I will show him my salvation. Each section has words in bold and pink. These show a progression in the psalm, beginning with an initial assurance that the king will see the punishment of the wicked, leading to the king himself enacting the punishment and trampling on his enemies, and culminating when the Lord will show the king his salvation. This extends beyond a one-time triumph to an enduring security in the Lord's care throughout a long life. The words in bold and blue indicate another progression involving a repeated Hebrew verb. At first, the king sees the punishment of the wicked. In the end, the Lord shows him salvation, which means causes him to see the salvation, which includes the punishment of the wicked. At the end of the psalm, the Lord takes responsibility for even enabling the king to see. Understanding the emotional tone of each section is important to understand the psalm itself. In "Danger will not come near," the tone is characterized by relief and confidence. In "His angels will protect you," the confidence is joined by triumph, especially with the imagery of trampling on enemies. In "I will give him long life," the tone of the Lord's vow is marked by a resolve to do exactly what he said he would do. Now that we have the structure of the whole psalm in mind, let's look at the details verse by verse. This psalm has no superscription, which means we do not know who wrote it or whether it was written for a special occasion. As we will see, however, the imagery suggests this is a meditation, a psalm confessing confidence in the Lord, even in the face of enemy attacks. The speaker seems to be a king. Danger will not come near. The first section begins in the middle of a crisis with multiple sources of danger. Verse 1. "The one living in the shelter of the Most High, who rests in the shade of the Almighty." Later imagery suggests that the crisis at hand is that enemies are threatening to attack, specifically threatening to lay siege against the king's city, surrounding it to try to capture the city. When facing such a threat, what can be said about the person who trusts in the Lord? The psalm begins by describing this person as the one living in the shelter of the Most High. In military terms, places which are high are safe. So the Most High, as a name for the Lord, indicates the one who is secure and can ensure others are secure. To live in his shelter means enjoying that security. So the opening line of this poem refers to one who is kept absolutely secure. Similarly, to rest in his shade means that just as shade from trees and rocks offers protection from exposure to the sun's heat to anyone who is hot and weary, so resting in the Almighty's shade gives protection and relief from exposure to dangerous circumstances. In the first verse, the dangerous circumstances and the need for shelter are assumed. The important point is that it is possible to find security and protection even in these circumstances. The topic here is the person who trusts the Lord and seeks out his protection. See our exegetical issues video for a discussion of the grammar of these first two verses. Verse 2. This one, who lives in the shelter of the Most High and rests in the shade of the Almighty, says to the Lord, "You are my refuge and fortress, my God in whom I trust." In response to danger, the person who finds security in the Lord openly confesses it, speaking to the Lord. The Hebrew is abrupt, literally saying, "My refuge, my fortress, my God in whom I trust." The abruptness may represent breathlessness, as if the person is running from danger. Describing the Lord as his refuge and fortress indicates he had need for a refuge and a fortress. He needed protection from some danger. Physical fortresses offered the people within their walls protection and height, where they could act defensively and offensively. The Lord as a fortress signifies being under the Lord's protection, beyond the reach of evil, and enabled to both stay safe and even to fight back, as we'll see in verse 8. This verse captures the essence of the entire psalm. It is a confession of trust in God. This is not a silent, wordless trust, but a beautifully expressed trust, communicated through powerful images that resonate emotionally. This trust is not static, but an ongoing relationship which has to be lived out in vivid detail. In this psalm, that trust is lived out through meditation on what the king believes to be true and needs to rely on in his current circumstances. Verse 3. For he will rescue you from a hunter's trap and from a destructive plague. Verse 3 provides the reason for the king's trust. He trusts in the Lord, for even when enemies attack and lay siege like hunters trapping an animal, he knows that the Lord will rescue him from every trap. In a siege, the enemy army would surround a city for days, weeks, sometimes even years, to prevent anyone from entering or exiting until starvation or thirst forced the city to surrender. Lengthy sieges could start destructive plagues. But even then, the king knows that the Lord will rescue him. The king is well aware of the dangers he is facing. Trusting the Lord does not mean ignoring the dangers, but rather acknowledging them and acknowledging that the Lord will rescue him from them. The image of a hunter's trap symbolizes the direct dangers that come from enemies and warfare, while the destructive plague represents the indirect dangers that arise. The king can trust the Lord in both. Verse 4. He will cover you with his pinion, and you will find refuge under his wings. His faithfulness will be a shield and a wall. These two images, portraying dangers from people and dangers from nature, now have corresponding images. An image from nature of a mother bird, providing refuge for her chicks under her wings, as well as a military image of a shield protecting a soldier, or a wall protecting an entire army from incoming attacks. Each image of protection is repeated: pinion and wings for the mother bird, and shield and wall for the military image. Poetically, the dangers are countered with double protection. Verse 5. You will not be afraid of danger of the night, or of the arrow that flies during the day. The siege imagery becomes more clear here, using pairs of terms in order to represent the whole. Night attacks by enemies were always feared, since unseen dangers might outsmart the defenses of the army. The arrow that flies by day represents daytime attacks. Together, night attacks and daytime attacks represent all military dangers of any kind and at any time of day. Verse 3 introduced the categories of danger, and verse 5 begins to elaborate on the specific direct dangers, particularly from a military perspective. Verse 6. Or of the plague that moves in the deep darkness, or of the disaster that devastates at noon. Verse 6 elaborates on the indirect dangers. Siege warfare often resulted in plagues and epidemics because of the unsanitary conditions and limited access to water and fresh food. The word for plague also occurs in Hosea 13, which poetically describes the plagues of death. The word for disaster also occurs in the Hosea passage, and, importantly, in Deuteronomy 32 in the list of covenant curses. Plagues and disaster could be a result of siege warfare. They could also be evidence that Israel had disobeyed the covenant. The terms deep darkness and noon are intended to be understood as opposites that represent the whole, at any time at all. The king who trusts in the Lord does not need to fear natural disaster or disease at any time of day. Verse 7, though 1,000 fall at your side, and 10,000 at your right side, to you it will not come near. It is one thing to observe dangers from a distance. It is another for danger to strike down those nearby. Even if, in military combat, thousands and thousands should fall and die all around the king, the Lord's faithfulness remains sufficient protection for him. Even if, with plague sweeping through the land, thousands and thousands should die, the Lord's faithfulness remains sufficient to keep the king safe. The protection the Lord provides is personal. This is not protection for the king's entire army, implying none of his soldiers would fall. There will be danger and calamity, but in the midst of it, the Lord will take care of his king. He will be faithful to his king at all times and in all circumstances. Verse 8. Rather, you will look with your eyes, and you will see wicked people's punishment. A regular theme in the Psalms is that the distress that first threatens the king ends up happening instead to his enemies, while the king looks on in triumph. This is what is happening here. Instead of danger affecting the king, which would be understood as punishment from God, the king will actually see punishment affecting wicked people, his enemies. In the previous verse, danger did not come near. But here, punishment is close enough that the king can see it with his own eyes. It is very near. Instead of military defeat, there will be victory. Instead of plague devastating himself and his people, he will see it devastating his enemies. the wicked will receive the punishment, not the righteous king. This is not a promise that the king will never experience hardship in battle, as indicated by those around him falling in verse 7. It is a promise that he will not receive punishment. There will be disappointments and struggles, but those will be part of the Lord's larger plan for salvation for the king and punishment for his enemies. It is precisely when the circumstances are difficult, and it is not obvious that the wicked will be punished, that the king needs to remind himself his enemies will ultimately be defeated, and the presence of the Lord will be with him even in these troublesome circumstances, as we will see later. No matter what his eyes see at the present moment, they will look upon the wicked being punished and the righteous being saved. His angels will protect you. In the second section, the king repeats his meditation on the impending dangers, both known and unknown. However, this time he shifts his focus to how the Lord will protect him. The Lord begins to become personally involved, sending his own angels to protect the king. This section opens with a second confession of trust. You, Lord, are my refuge. This echoes the confession in verse 2. Verse 9. For, you say, Lord, you are my refuge. You have made the Most High your home. The Hebrew is literally, for you, Lord, my refuge. You have made the Most High your home. There is no introduction to the direct speech. This may be intended to poetically reflect a sense of urgency for you, Lord, my refuge. The logic of the poem as a whole is that the king can live confidently and trust in the Lord, and this verse gives the evidence. His confession declares the Lord alone is his refuge. This confession means the Most High, the supreme military commander, is indeed his home or protection. Hebrew poetry delights in parallel lines, where two similar thoughts are put side by side to communicate an even richer idea. This verse is unique in communicating the first line as direct speech by the king, and the second line in the voice of the psalmist, echoing and confirming what the king has just claimed. This is the core of the meditation. The king confesses aloud what he believes, and the psalmist confirms it. There is no new content here. It is the same message. The purpose is not to provide new content, but to enable the king to fully embrace and live out what he knows to be true. Verse 10. Harm will not come to you, and disease will not reach your home. Verse 10 summarizes the first section, confirming everything already said. Even if the city is besieged or an epidemic breaks out, the king still does not need to fear. These are significant threats, however, which prompts further meditation on why the king can have this confidence. Verse 11. Because he will order his angels concerning you, to protect you in all of your ways. This is why the king can trust the Lord, because he will order his angels to fight on behalf of the king, to protect the king in all his ways. Angels are not often mentioned in the Old Testament. When Abraham sends a servant to find a wife for his son Isaac from among his own people, he assures the servant that God will send his angel to prepare the way. When God speaks in Exodus of granting the land to his people, he says he will send an angel to guard you on your way. If they carefully obey this angel, then, God says, I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. Angels indicate God's direct involvement in the lives of his people. the Lord is intimately concerned with his king, to the extent that, when danger is near, he will order his angels to take care of his covenant partner. Their job is comprehensive, to protect him in all of his ways. This means the supreme ability and power of divine beings is dedicated to serve the king in everything he pursues. That is a powerful promise to meditate on. Verse 12. They will carry you in their arms, so that your foot does not stumble on any stones. What does it mean for angels to protect the king? The answer is presented in the image of a journey where the king walks along a path. Hebrew often uses the image of walking along a path. Stones represent obstacles that threaten to slow down or even stop the journey. Often, the Psalms will ask for a smooth path or a level path, a path without significant difficulties. The current path is neither smooth nor level. There are stones, and they likely seem impossible to overcome. But those obstacles become powerless to stop the king when God's own angels are carrying him in their arms, as if bodily lifting him over every stone so that he cannot stumble and risk being stopped. Throughout the psalm, intense difficulty is assumed, but God's protection is more than sufficient to overcome every difficulty. These verses are cited in the New Testament in Matthew 4 and Luke 4 by the devil when he seeks to tempt Jesus. Verse 13. You will tread upon a lion and a viper. You will trample a young lion and a serpent. The word for tread in Hebrew is related to the word for ways in verse 11. This connection suggests that verse 13 provides an illustration of what it looks like for angels to protect the king in all his ways. A lion is stronger than humans and hides, watching carefully before making a planned attack. A viper is a cunning and venomous snake who also attacks suddenly from hidden places. These two animals symbolize enemies who will wait for their opportunity and then attack suddenly, stealthily, and with deadly force. But such enemies, normally the terror of kings, will no longer be able to terrify this king. This king, protected by the Lord's angels, will tread on the creatures like a lion and a viper. In verse 8, the king saw the punishment of his enemies. Here, the image of treading on or trampling on shows the king is bringing the punishment. The king is defeating the enemies that would normally be able to overcome and surprise him. These two lines repeat the same idea, with an inversion of the word order in Hebrew called a chiasm. The structure strengthens and emphasizes the assertion. As surprising as it may seem, it is genuinely true that the king, protected by the Lord's angels, will be able to overcome deadly and merciless enemies like these. I will give him long life. The king has made his confessions, and the psalmist has responded, confirming all the king said. Now, the Lord himself speaks, not only validating the king and psalmist, but making an additional promise, long life. Verse 14, for he has clung to me, so I will rescue him. I will keep him safe because he knows my name. The Lord sees the distress of the king, and he recognizes that he is clinging to the Lord in his need. The word order in the Hebrew indicates the king has clung only to the Lord, which means he has not sought help elsewhere, whether in foreign alliances or false gods. This exclusive dependence on the Lord is the king's obligation in the covenant. a commitment the Lord will now honor. He will rescue the king and keep him safe. To know the name of the Lord is to understand who he is and what he requires, and to trust him, as we find also in Psalm 9:11. Those who know your name put their trust in you. The king's complete dependence on the Lord reveals he has understood what the covenant requires, and he has embraced it wholeheartedly. Verse 15, he cries out to me, so I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will rescue him, and I will honor him. Verse 15 differs from the usual two-line verses of this psalm. It has 3 lines, and the third line breaks the pattern. In verses 14 and 15, the king's distress and the Lord's response are both mentioned. When the king is in distress, the Lord will respond. In the third line of verse 15, however, there is no mention of the distress or the king calling out. The Lord alone takes the initiative to rescue and even honor the king. In this vow, the Lord confirms all the king has said and adds even more. The king has already called out, and that is enough. Now, the Lord is committed to rescuing and honoring him. For the Lord to honor a person is a remarkable statement. This uses the same Hebrew root word as glory, which could therefore be translated as, I will glorify him. The more common expectation is for a human to glorify God, not the other way around. For example, in Psalm 50, verse 15, the Lord speaks of his anointed calling upon him in the day of trouble, and he says, using this same word, I will deliver you, and you shall glorify me. People commonly honor other people, as in the 4th commandment, to honor your parents. But 1 Samuel 2:30 is the only other instance in which the Lord speaks of honoring a person. Those who honor me, I will honor, and those who despise me shall be lightly esteemed. The Lord promises to do more than simply rescue the king. He will treat him as a full covenant partner, honoring the fact that the king has honored him by trusting him, and now the Lord will honor the king. The defeat of the enemies in verses 8 and 13 entails their public shame. Honor refers to one's public status before society. The Lord also promises the public honor of the king. Verse 16, I will give him his fill of long life, and I will show him my salvation. What verse 15 began, verse 16 amplifies. Not only public honor, but long life is in store for the king. A psalm that began with expressing confidence in protection from immediate harm might have been content with only that, survival from the current circumstances. Verse 16 goes far beyond the present circumstances to the entire life of the king. To have his fill of long life refers to a long, prosperous, fulfilled life. If the king has been granted to live life to the full, why would he fear any harm? The emotional tone of the end of the psalm is now far from danger, fear, and even the need for protection. It has become full of awe at the magnitude of God's goodness and extravagant gift. The final line, I will show him my salvation, must be understood in this context. Often, salvation is understood as deliverance from specific circumstances. It cannot be limited to that after the promise of long life. Salvation here is the fullness of covenant blessings that start with protection from immediate harm and extend to prosperity and fullness of life. The covenant is not merely protection from harm. It is a relationship of trust that leads into every blessing imaginable for all of life. Psalm 91 is highly repetitive in its content and themes because it contains information that is not automatically or quickly believed and lived out. Its purpose is not to teach anything new, but to meditate on the tremendous promise of protection in all things that the Lord offers to his covenant partner. The covenant partner of the Lord, always first and foremost the King, lives life in the shelter of the Most High, which means he experiences endless attacks and distress, but he is not overcome by them because the Lord protects him. There is no need for protection if there are no attacks or distress. The king has plenty. It is during a time of distress, such as a siege against his city, that he needs to exercise his trust in the Lord. This psalm shows what it means to exercise that trust, to both proclaim one's faith and then to reason through it, articulating with multiple images what the Lord has promised to do, whether threats from people or threats from disease and nature. The Lord has promised to protect his king. In detail, whether night attacks, daytime attacks, plague, bloody battles, in every one of these, the Lord will protect his own. In the second section, the protection becomes personal. The Lord sends his own angels to ensure the safety of his king. The king's path is full of obstacles or stones, but the angels will lift him up past every obstacle, ensuring his success. When they put him down, it is to trample his enemies in defeat. The king shifts from merely receiving protection to actively engaging in defeating his enemies. In the third section, the Lord alone speaks. He confirms everything said already, all the promises of protection. He promises even more than protection, however. Not only will he rescue his king, but he will honor him and grant him long life. Salvation is more than deliverance from difficult circumstances. Salvation is the fullness of covenant life, blessings of every kind that last for all of life. We will now read the entire psalm. The one living in the shelter of the Most High, who rests in the shade of the Almighty, says to the Lord, "You are my refuge and fortress, my God in whom I trust. For he will rescue you from a hunter's trap and from a destructive plague. He will cover you with his pinion, and you will find refuge under his wings. His faithfulness will be a shield and a wall. You will not be afraid of danger of the night, or of the arrow that flies during the day, or of the plague that moves in the deep darkness, or of the disaster that devastates at noon. Though 1,000 fall at your side, and 10,000 at your right side, to you it will not come near. Rather, you will look with your eyes, and you will see wicked people's punishment. For, you say, Lord, you are my refuge. You have made the Most High your home. Harm will not come to you, and disease will not reach your home, because he will order his angels concerning you to protect you in all of your ways. They will carry you in their arms so that your foot does not stumble on any stones. You will tread upon a lion and a viper. You will trample a young lion and a serpent. For he has clung to me, so I will rescue him. I will keep him safe because he knows my name. He cries out to me, so I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will rescue him, and I will honor him. I will give him his fill of long life and I will show him my salvation. This has been the overview video for Psalm 91. Our goal in this video is to present a single, coherent interpretation of the psalm. Our exegetical issues video discusses other scholarly views, and our poetic features video explores the distinctively poetic nature of the psalm as Hebrew poetry. Please visit us at scriptura.world to learn more about our project and more details of this specific psalm. Thank you.